have one 7-year-old autistic student with perfect pitch who in one lesson learned how to play Don't Stop Believin' by Journey on the piano with both hands. So full chords in the right hand, left
Wow.
hand playing the bass line, singing the lyrics in his tiny 7-year-old voice. And he lives for like the circle of fifths and transposing. So I started calling out random keys for him to transpose into, and he did on the spot. And this is a kid who has a hard time tying his shoes, and his teachers think that his grade level and his like intellectual age are a few years behind what they actually are. So it's really cool to see these kids display their deep understanding and their creative genius.
Hi teachers, and welcome back to the Topcast, the official music teachers podcast, and you are listening to episode number 204 with a very special welcome to my Top Music Pro teachers out there. How is everyone doing? I hope everyone's going okay. If you're over in the Northern Hemisphere, then you're hopefully enjoying a bit of a summer break. Down here, we keep on plugging away in our winter, and I hope things are going okay for you, particularly if you're in a bit of a lockdown zone, as I am at the moment. Such fun. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing some of our most vulnerable and sometimes challenging students, those with special needs. Our special needs resources on the blog are some of the most popular resources because even the most experienced teachers, and myself included, can find aspects of teaching special needs students incredibly challenging and also, of course, rewarding. And we'll talk about those two things today. And we all know that all our students are individual and need a tailored approach, and never is this more true than our students with special needs. Before we get into today's episode, I did want to mention that we've just released a brand new course on this topic. It's the first time we've ever focused on this for one of our flagship Academy courses, and it releases today for our Top Music Pro members. Next week, on Monday, the 24th of August, that's Melbourne time. So that's going to be this Sunday night if you're in the US or UK. We're going to be hosting a free webinar to unpack this topic in more detail. So we'll be talking about particularly how this relates to online lessons and also answering as many questions as we possibly can. The webinar is 100% free, and we're always giving away lots of bonuses and downloads and things. So register to get your spot or replay code at topmusic.co/webinar. As usual, our show notes for today and full transcript are now available at topmusic.co/episode 204. My guest today is a lifelong pianist and has been a piano teacher for over a decade. She owns a studio in the San Francisco Bay Area, California, where she specializes in working with students with special needs. She equips teachers all over the world with the mindset, tools, and curriculum to teach students with special needs and to help their studios flourish. Welcome to the show, Selena Pistoresi. Great to have you with us on the podcast. Thanks for coming along.
Thanks for having me. I've been listening for years, and I'm so happy to be here.
Super to connect with you. And you're actually one of our Top Music Pro Evolution members. So I've actually been hanging out with you a fair bit recently, which is always fun because we have every 2 weeks we meet together online to chat about our business plans and things like that. And it's just been wonderful seeing your progression over the last few months as you've been working towards not just growing a studio, but also looking beyond the studio and how you can create resources for other teachers on the subject of today's podcast, actually. So it's been great to dive in with that with you. So how did you come to specialize in teaching students with special needs? Was it a conscious decision, or did it just kind of evolve?
Yeah, like most things in my life, it was kind of a series of accidents. I've been teaching piano since I was in high school, and it was a part-time job throughout high school and university. And then my last year of university, I got a job at a brand new startup inclusion school in Silicon Valley where I live. So being an inclusion school, the goal was to have students with special needs, as well as those who are typically mainstreamed and those who are gifted, all in the same classroom at the same time.
Oh, wow. Okay. So both those that perhaps are struggling and need more support and those that need more extension.
Exactly.
Right. And it was called a startup school. What could only happen in Silicon Valley, surely.
It was so Silicon Valley, And so at first I did a lot of admin work, but as the school grew, my role changed, and the director knew that I taught piano and studied music. So she said, "Why don't you just develop a music program?" And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So I started to dabble, but it was quite a task. Like I said, kids age 5 to 14, some with special needs, some without, all in the same classroom. So I got a really eclectic type of experience. And I also pulled out students one-on-one throughout the school day to teach piano lessons. And that's when I really started experimenting with teaching students with special needs piano. So I would say the main things I learned from that experience were that many of the students who had previously been classified as, quote, severe or low functioning, which I kind of hate that terminology, but it's still used. So students who were like nonverbal and who had severe motor skills challenges, many of them were actually incredibly musically gifted and had perfect pitch or just had a huge affinity for music. And I also learned that there was kind of a lack of information out there on working with students with special needs. So I realized that teaching piano was my favorite thing that I did. And I left the school and I went full time with my studio in 2015.
Very cool. And so what does your school or studio look like now, and where do you teach?
I'm based in San Jose, California, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's called Cultivate Music Studio, and I personally teach about 50 to 55 students every week. And
Whoa.
yeah,
That's huge.
it's a lot. And I also teach music garden, early childhood group music classes. And I've also had other teachers on board at various points to run summer camps and teach piano as well.
Oh my goodness, that is a huge teaching load. So the 50 to 55 doesn't include the music garden groups?
Correct. Yeah, that's just private piano students.
Oh, wow. Selena, how do you do that? That's full on.
That's one of the reasons why I wanted to start talking about teaching students with special needs more. I want more teachers doing it. I want to hire more teachers doing it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow. Okay. And so do you mainly teach children, or are there some adults there too?
mainly children, although I do have a few adult students and I love teaching them. But since I started my studio with, I think, 4 students with special needs, and it grew 100% by referral, it's just turned into my accidental area of expertise.
And you've got lots of experience to share, which I'm delighted to get to today.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, we should probably just clarify what we mean by special needs as well, because this can be a huge spectrum of situations that
Right.
children or people find themselves in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can think of special needs as being kind of in 4 broad categories. We can have physical, developmental, behavioral / emotional, and sensory impaired. So this is a generalization because there's also quite a bit of overlap in between those categories. But physical special needs are chronic conditions and diseases like epilepsy, asthma, muscular dystrophy, and so on. Developmental special needs are probably what you think of when you think of special needs. So, like autism or autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, ADHD, dyslexia, and so on. And then behavioral emotional category, we have things like obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, depression. And then sensory impaired would be things like blindness or visual impairments, as well as deaf or hearing impairments.
Well, I mean, that is just a massive spectrum. So, I mean, any
Right.
discussion on this topic is going to be a generalization, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
By necessity. And while we'd love to provide resources for every single different special need there is out there, there's only so much time in the day. So let's focus perhaps on what is the most common special need that you see in your students at the moment?
Yeah, I definitely won't claim to know everything about all special needs, but most of my students are autistic. So these days, about 1 in 54 children are autistic. So most piano teachers will likely get at least one request for this over the course of their teaching careers. I also want to take a quick minute to touch on the terminology because some people might have just cringed when they heard me say autistic. I know a lot of people try to be as inclusive and sensitive as possible when discussing special needs. And you'll probably come across a lively debate over whether we should say people with autism or autistic people. And at first glance, it might make sense or feel more polite to use the person first language, like my student has autism. But many autistic people themselves prefer to refer to themselves as autistic as a way of recognizing that their autism is part of their identity and their neurology, as opposed to a disease that needs to be cured or fixed. So I think it's really important to recognize neurodiversity, which is basically the concept that brain differences are normal rather than deficits.
Yeah, so and if you can hear the printer in the background, my son's just printing his schoolwork for today's remote learning.
I
Good
can't hear it
timing.
actually. You could have
That's
told me.
good. That's good. I wonder whether is it probably just a good idea to talk to people about the terminology you use, or talk to the parents about it to try and get that right.
Yeah, I mean, even parents sometimes will say things in front of their own kids, like, "This is my kid; he's low functioning," and
Oh,
it makes my soul die a little bit because this kid can hear you, they understand even if they're not verbal. And so, yeah, I think it's important to talk about it. And it's also just an interesting way of thinking about the brain and neurodiversity. Like maybe these students, they're not suffering from a disorder. Maybe they're just thinking differently, and we
different.
need to kind of accommodate that in our teaching.
Yeah, it's a wonderfully positive way to look at it too, particularly when you talk about things like perfect pitch and the skills that these children
Yeah,
have
absolutely.
despite what's going on for them. What do you find then are the most challenging things about teaching special needs students? Because it must be really hard sometimes.
Yeah, it can be, but really any teaching can be. So in the beginning, I think it was challenging because I took behaviors that I saw at face value. So if a student was bouncing around the room or covering their ears or not answering my questions, I would just get frustrated. Like, why is the student misbehaving? Or do they not get it? What am I doing wrong? But as soon as I was able to make the mental shift and understand that outward behavior doesn't reflect inner understanding or ability, it was a lot easier to let these things go and simply keep teaching. Also, there can be some behaviors that are considered aggressive, but those are usually mitigated when you learn how to talk to a student with respect and in an age appropriate way, and when you're teaching them in a way that they're able to demonstrate their knowledge.
I
So
think that
I would
last
also,
point's probably that's what I've experienced before when I've had
yeah,
a child in this category. It's like when you
right,
work out the right way to connect with them and what works for them and the environment and all of those things and routines and things like that's when the aggression, if that is one of their behaviors, tends to calm down. That's what I've found anyway.
right. And anyone would feel really frustrated at best and aggressive at worst if they felt not understood. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then I would say also there's a unique element at play when it comes to parents sometimes. So, sometimes parents have their kids enrolled in like different kinds of therapies, particularly behavior interventions. They might want your piano lessons to be a continuation of behavior interventions. And sometimes it conflicts with the way that you'd want to teach the student. So there can be kind of a dance with the parents as well.
Well, we love the parental dances. We
We
all
do.
do, regardless of our students. Oh, it's funny, isn't it? I've become great friends with some of my students' parents, and others
Yeah,
just not the kind
me
of people I
too.
want to hang out with at all. So
Yeah,
we've talked about some challenges. What about the most enjoyable part of it? Because there are some absolutely amazing times you can have with these children when they have a win and they get
absolutely.
excited and things like that. So tell us about a few of those for you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love seeing all of the non-piano progress that students make inevitably. Like playing the piano is a highly motivating activity. So a lot of times it helps students make huge gains in their fine motor skills and their visual tracking skills. Sometimes their occupational therapists will say like, what has your kid been doing? Now they can do this thing that we've been working on. Of course, it's not a substitute for therapy, but it's just another way to work on skills. And then also because of, a lot of times they're differing brains and neurology and their musical gifts like perfect pitch, which is way more common among people with autism and a few other conditions like Williams syndrome than it is in the general population. These students can make really interesting connections and get so much pleasure out of learning theory. Like, for example, I have one 7-year-old autistic student with perfect pitch who, in one lesson, learned how to play Don't Stop Believin' by Journey on the piano with both hands. So, full chords in the right hand, left
Wow.
hand playing the bass line, singing the lyrics in his tiny 7-year-old voice. And he lives for like the circle of fifths and transposing. So I started calling out random keys for him to transpose into, and he did on the spot. And this is a kid who has a hard time tying his shoes, and
Mm.
his teachers think that his grade level and his like intellectual age are a few years behind what they actually are. So it's really cool to see these kids display their deep understanding and their creative genius.
That's wonderful. So, do you find most of the time parents will, when they enroll a student with you, be able to say, "Oh, yes, my child's been diagnosed, and here's the situation"? Or do you sometimes have students coming to you and you have to go, "Something going on here. Maybe I need to speak to the parents."
Yeah, so I've never suggested to a parent that there may need to be a diagnosis, even if I've had my suspicions. First of all, I've seen a lot, but I'm not a doctor and I wouldn't want to step outside the bounds of my expertise. But also importantly, I found that the diagnosis might not really even matter sometimes. Like for example, autism can manifest in countless ways. So it's important to just meet the student, get to know them for who they are. And most of the time, though, parents will let you know about any diagnoses.
Mm. All right, so let's get really practical. What's for you the first step in building a really strong teaching foundation and relationship with a special needs student in your studio?
This is my favorite question. The very first step is presuming competence. So the student comes in, and no matter what they do or how they appear, they say something that you think is really weird. It's important to speak to them in age appropriate language and assume they understand you. So sometimes when people meet students with special needs, especially if they're nonverbal or don't have reliable speech, it's tempting to talk slowly or in like a sing-songy voice, but it can be really patronizing and frustrating to the student. So to gain
Mm.
respect, believe they're capable of understanding, and that'll go a long way right in the
Mm.
beginning.
And what about the physical environment of the studio? If they're coming into your space, do you need to make considerations before they come in?
Yeah, that's
Sometimes, yeah.
another tip I give is it's important to make your studio environment sensory friendly. So if the student has many students that come to you will come with sensory integration issues. So they might be oversensitive or undersensitive to input from lights, sounds, smells, textures. So, consider the lighting in your studio. Try to avoid overhead fluorescent lights if you can. Go for lamps or natural lighting with shades if you need to. Try to eliminate outside sounds. Use unscented everything. Scents are a really big one, actually.
That would include deodorants and perfumes and things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're used to wearing your favorite scented lotion, it can be hugely distracting for the whole lesson.
Mm.
And, even storing things in like a closed cabinet instead of on an open bookshelf, that can go a really long way in just maintaining, not causing visual clutter and helping the student not be overwhelmed.
So if you've got piles of music everywhere, toys, stuff, they just spread all over the
Yeah.
floor like online teaching has caused for us all, you might want to fix that
It's
up.
actually really hard to go back and forth. So yeah, you'll have to pick them up.
All right. So what about some other tips that you've found work really well, either with some quick ideas or just general teaching thoughts?
Yeah, one that gets kind of thrown around a lot, which I totally agree with, is provide some structure in your lesson. So, students with special needs can have a lot of anxiety around what comes next and how long each activity will last. So, it might require a bit more planning on your part, but create a schedule with the student at the beginning of the lesson. And you can say out loud each item and write it on a whiteboard or a piece of paper. If the student is verbal, of course, you can just ask, do you want to improvise first or the lesson book first? But if the student is nonverbal, you can say and write your two options on two separate pieces of paper and have them point to the one they want. And even if students don't seem to be choosing intentionally, just giving them the choice is really important. And then later you can say, well, you chose this one, so we're doing that.
That's good. And what about do games work in the same way? Like, is it better to try and keep children kind of centered and on the bench and kind of still, or is it better to get them moving around, or will it really just depend on the child like it does in any other lesson?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. I would say if a student is having a really hard time sitting on the bench, or even a kind of hard time, let them get up. I mean, you can do so much from standing in the middle of the room, or I actually have a couple of electric keyboards in my studio. And if they go sit on the floor, I'll just bring the keyboard and we'll just keep going on the floor. I mean,
why not?
It's okay. Just meet them wherever they are.
It's about being flexible ultimately, right?
Yeah, I've had to become so flexible.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I've learned in this whole lockdown, remote learning, all this kind of stuff is that I've had to completely change my own expectations of myself as a teacher and as a parent and as a business person about how much I can do and what's okay. And so I was getting really frustrated at the start when I just didn't seem to be getting anything done in either lessons or in my work or because of interruptions and all that kind of stuff. And I think, would I be right in saying that would be the same for teaching students with special needs? It'd be about just realizing that maybe for some children, just playing a note or singing something in a lesson could be the most amazing thing, and that's okay.
Yeah, definitely we need to go a little easier on ourselves. Of course, you can get the parents more involved in online lessons and kind of train them on how to support the students, but a lot of times it's just going to be you might just not. You might spend 5 minutes trying to show the student where to put their hand on the piano, and that's just okay.
Mm. I want to come back to the online lesson question in a moment. But before that,
Hmm.
I remember in some of our previous conversations, we were talking about methods and approaches for reading. And of course, I, like a lot of teachers, really love methods that move all around the piano as soon as possible. You start up here and you're cascading down, and you're at the bottom and then you're at the top. And you've
Yeah.
told me that maybe that's not the best thing for these students.
Yeah. So in general, I totally agree that students should get comfortable as early as possible moving all over the keyboard and not being married to any one position. But students who have poor motor skills, especially fine motor skills, they often can't initiate movements on their own or make purposeful movement. So some students can't even hover their hand over the piano if you ask them to. So I think it's really important to start in a single five finger position. Like I use C position in the beginning, so they can start to develop keyboard awareness. There's still that component of your C, then D, E, F, G. But for now, your thumb is always your C finger. Your finger two is always your D finger, just so that they have something to anchor them right in the beginning. And they're still playing songs that are fairly interesting. Five notes is better than the normal two or three black keys in like typical pre-reading. But that way, it just kind of draws them in, and they'll have time to build their motor skills and keyboard awareness first. And then, of
Mm.
course, you can always branch out to other positions.
Yeah, and do it at the speed that some students will get through that and they'll be fine with that, and others
Right.
may need to stay in C position for a very long time. I've heard some of my members talk about some students needing a year or more in a very limited
Right.
position, and that's making progress for them. But that's just the different approaches we need for our students.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the biggest challenges, of course, to hit everyone, but particularly teachers of special needs students, is COVID-19 and the move to online lessons. So how's this impacted your teaching?
Yeah, at first it was a huge adjustment. I think for all of us it was. We weren't, myself and the parents, we weren't really sure how it would go. But in some respects, it's been a challenge because, I haven't been able to play duets with the students or use hands-on physical prompting to help develop motor skills. But there's actually a huge benefit too, which is that, of course, it's critical that parents are involved in practicing, especially when their students have special needs. And so I've always worked with parents during the lesson to make sure they know exactly how the methods work, how to point, how to give hand support. But when we moved online, I realized how many parents had either never practiced with their students at home, or they thought they knew how to support their kids, but they weren't quite doing it right. And it was a really good chance for me to peek in to their home practice environment and make some minor adjustments to the way they work together. Even just saying, hey, don't forget to point to each letter while they play, or they look like they're sitting a little too low. Can you put some pillows on the bench? And it made huge improvements in the students playing.
It must be even more vital for parents to be involved in these lessons than perhaps with other students who are more self-directed.
Yeah, for better or worse, we need the parents there most of the time.
Have you had any parents sort
Yeah,
of say, I don't have time? And what do you do then?
I did. I had a small handful, two or three or four that just wouldn't. And I just said, for now, we're not working together. It's just not really feasible to do the online lessons without their input. But I do have a couple students who maybe have been taking lessons for a couple years, and they're doing pretty well on their own too. So just depends on the student's level.
Mm. So, apart from getting the parents involved, any other tips for teachers moving online with their students? I mean, most of us have been doing it for some time now, but they
Yeah.
maybe struggling still. Or I know that in the United States, you're starting to be moving back to schools, but some schools are
Hmm.
closed, some are. I mean, it's all over the place, isn't it? But any sort of more general tips?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the usual ones apply, like, be very concise about where you want students to start from. I think screen share is your best friend. If you can have a digital copy of your students' music and then pull it up and annotate to show where you want them to play from, that's great.
So screen sharing your iPad or something with their score on it where you can circle things right in front of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and along those same lines, you can take advantage of Zoom's annotate and screen share feature. And I'd love to pull up the whiteboard and then type whatever I'm saying as I'm saying it. Not every
Mm.
word, but if I'm teaching a new concept. So that way students with sensory integration issues they can get the information in a couple of different channels. They can hear me
Mm.
say it and they could read it while I type it. And a lot of times that kind of goes the extra mile and gives them what they need to really understand it.
Mm.
So that's
Right.
actually something that I'll miss. Being able to do like pull up a whiteboard and also being able to just quickly record something, a part of the lesson. Those are things that I like about the online lesson.
What is California's move as schools return?
I think everything is still distance learning when school goes back in about a month.
Right.
So I haven't actually figured out exactly what everyone's doing because I'm just staying online. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's looking like everybody's just getting used to this now.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, it's been interesting seeing in our forums and things photos of people with studios, and they've put up plexiglass between them and their students,
hmm
obviously mask and hand washing and sanitization and things. So, I mean, even if doors are open and students are coming back in, it's a different experience.
It's really difficult, especially with students with special needs who might not be able to wear a mask, sensory
Mm,
issues, or, I have to touch their hand to help them play.
right.
So I'm probably just going to wait until, everyone can just go fully back to in person.
Yeah. It's a real challenge, as we all know.
Yeah, it is.
I'm keen to, before we sign off, I want to talk about a webinar which we've got coming up with you, which is
Yeah.
very, very exciting. And I also just want to hear if there's anything we might have missed, which you're the expert here, which you'd like to say before we sign off. So have a think about that. But I did want to let everyone know that you're joining us for a free webinar. I haven't done a webinar for a couple of months now, so I'm super excited to do these because I always love getting all our teachers and members and everyone together. So it's coming up on this Sunday night if you're in the USA or the UK. So if you're hearing this on its published date, which is Friday, the 21st of August, if you are listening live, it's on Sunday night in the USA and the UK, which is Monday morning Australian time. And it's all about teaching students with special needs and strategies and ideas and activities and methods and all those kinds of things. And most importantly, all of our listeners who are going to be there at the webinar can ask questions directly, which of course they can't do on this podcast. And they're probably thinking, oh, I really wish you'd ask this question because I want to ask it. So that's your chance. So what kinds of things are we going to be covering, Selena?
Yeah, well, we'll talk about sort of an initial assessment of a student with special needs when they first come into your studio. We'll talk about really specific ideas for making your studio as sensory friendly as possible. We'll talk about the milestone method, which is the foundational method book series for developing motor skills and sight reading ability in students with special needs. And we'll talk about a few of my favorite games and tips for online lessons, as well as musical free time activity and ear training activities for nonverbal students and students with motor difficulties.
It sounds like a lot. We're going to pack it in and
Yeah,
always
we are.
giving people as much value as we possibly can. It'll be an hour. It's completely free. Come and join us. And if you'd like to register your place for that, then head to topmusic.co/webinar. And if you're not able to join us live, then we will share the replay as usual for about 48 hours after that or ongoing if you are a Top Music Pro member. So that's topmusic.co/webinar to join us for the webinar on special needs teaching with the fabulous Selena, who's joining us today. So before we wrap things up, Selena, any kind of final tips or thoughts or anything we might have missed from today?
Yeah, I would say, something that comes up all the time is that teachers say, my student has perfect pitch, so I'm going to teach them by ear. And I wanted to just challenge that a little bit and just kind of say that when students have perfect pitch, their ear will overpower any visual input that they get. So it's really important to never sing or play anything for students before you show them how to read it. So
Okay.
it sounds counterintuitive, like they have perfect pitch. Why don't you just play it for them and they'll play it back?
Oh, I see. If you play it and they can hear it, they'll play it back without reading the music. So if you want them to learn to read,
They just instantly memorize it and they'll never read the notes.
right.
So we'll talk about that more in the webinar, the exact method for doing that. But that's just a question that I see floating around a lot. So I wanted to talk about it.
And you've said there's a greater than half chance that a lot of these students will have perfect pitch. Is that right?
Yeah, it is possible that all of them or almost all of them do. It's really hard to tell based on the way that the research is done. But
Right.
in my experience, almost all of them do. So
Wow, it's extraordinary.
it's just a different way of teaching. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good little tip to keep in mind. So we're going to have many more tips. We will have bonuses to for you to download with some activities and all those kinds of things. And particularly, I think that the first point that you mentioned, which was diagnosing new students, that's not quite the right word because we're not professionals here, but just
like
having
assessing.
an assessment of students who come into your studio, so you can really guide them as best you can given their needs. So topmusic.co/webinar. We really look forward to seeing you and everyone listening on Monday morning, or that's Sunday night if you're in the USA or UK. So Selena, thank you so much for joining us today. It's super.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
And where can people find out more about what you do?
You can find me at my website, which is notablepiano.com. So Notable piano.com.
Fantastic. All right. Check out Selena's great work there, and we'll see you at the webinar. Thanks again, Selena.
Thank you.
If today's episode has brought up some questions in your mind and you'd like to hear directly from Selena and ask her questions, then a quick reminder that we've got that free webinar happening next Monday. So if you're listening to this live at publish date on Friday or over the weekend, then Monday is your time for the next webinar. So it's actually Sunday night if you're in the US and the UK. That's on the 23rd of August. Monday morning, the 24th of August, 8 a.m. Melbourne times when we're going live. Selena and I will be unpacking everything to do with special needs in more detail, answering those tricky questions as much as we can, and giving away a whole lot of bonuses as well. So make sure, if you haven't already done so, just head over to topmusic.co/webinar and reserve your seat. Next week on the podcast, we're back to part 2 of our spotlights on Piano Pivot Live members with an incredible Aussie teacher, Mary Chalabi, whose colourful studio and vibrant Instagram and Facebook following has seen her grown steadily, even during COVID-19. In fact, she started the year just before Piano Pivot Live with 0 students. Yes, you heard that correctly. 0 students. We'll find out why she started with none. And next week, we'll find out where she's at now. And if you heard about any event, product or service, or didn't have a chance to write something down today, don't worry. As always, we list everything you've heard about in this episode at the show notes over at topmusic.co/episode 204. I'm Tim Topham, and you're listening to the Topcast from topmusic.co. Look forward to speaking with you again next week. For more information about this episode and to find out how to enhance your own teaching, visit topmusic.co. You'll find everything you need for your studio, from lesson plans to cheat sheets, quick win teaching ideas, and guides on how to build your teaching business. Plus, you'll be connected to a global community of the world's top music teachers. And when you're ready, join hundreds of other teachers around the world by becoming a Top Music Pro member and get access to all our bonus content and flagship courses. And don't forget to follow topmusic.co on social media and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. That's all for today. We'll see you in the studio.